In 1950s New York, the CIA was secretly funding literary magazines, bankrolling cultural events, and quietly deciding which voices deserved to be heard and which did not. Into that world steps Louise, a working class woman with a sharp mind, an ambitious novel in her drawer, and no idea how deep the interference goes. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast, and my guest today is Carolyn Woods, author of The Lunar Housewife. Welcome to the Art and Fiction podcast, Caroline.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. I'm happy to be here.
Well, the Lunar Housewife is just a wonderful novel. I so enjoyed it. It's so original as well. So it's set in the 1950s New York literary world at a moment when the CIA is secretly funding and censoring the arts. So, how did you discover this history and then decide to write a novel about it?
I think I heard just a snippet on the radio one time about how the CIA had been secretly funding the Paris Review, or how they were actually involved in the inception of this incredibly storied literary magazine. And I was not too many years out of graduate school when we were encouraged to write short fiction and submit it to the best journals. And it just kind of blew me away. I thought, this magazine has such a reputation for being like literary, almost counterculture, and to hear that it was funded for this, or funded and encouraged to
Yeah.
kind of promote American ideals abroad was just really shocking. So then the more I dug into that, the more I came up with all these different examples of mid-century culture that was being sort of like pushed abroad so that we could win the cultural Cold
Yeah.
War. And I thought, well, there really is potential for a novel here.
So it's anchored by Louise, who is also writing her own novel, but she is a wonderful sort of prototype of an ambitious woman in the 1950s who is still very much constrained by the period. So tell us a little bit about how you developed the character of Louise.
Right. Louise has a number of real life counterparts who I could base her on. The men who were at the center of the hip literary scene in the 1950s were absolutely surrounded by women, and they did that by
Yeah,
design. But I figured pretty quickly that a lot of these women were aspiring writers themselves. And then
yeah,
the people who ended up exposing this story decades later, it was a lot of women. So the sort of definitive text, which I use for research, is a book called The Cultural Cold War by Frances Stoner Saunders. That is the gold text about this secret CIA program. So it was a woman journalist who brought the story to light. But also another big source that I used for this book is a book called Art and Madness, which is a
wow,
memoir by Anne Roiphe, who
yeah.
was having an affair with Doc Humes, who is one of the founders of the Paris Review. And in this book, she says that he was incredibly paranoid. He was always talking about listening devices and little green men, and the FBI is everywhere in our lives. And he did a lot of LSD. So in the memoir, she treats it as if it's a hallucination. But having read The Cultural Cold War, other books about the topic, I was like, I think he was onto something. I think they really were listening, and the FBI and CIA were everywhere and very much had their hands in the arts. So when I developed the character of Louise, I thought she's the girlfriend of one of the founders of this magazine. It's called Downtown in the Lunar Housewife, but it's loosely based on the Paris Review. And she's a bit of a purist. She wants to write a great book and for it to be published because it's a great book. And the more she learns and figures out about the way her boyfriend and his colleagues are playing inside baseball with the CIA, the more disillusioned she becomes.
Yes, she certainly does. So she's writing her own novel, The Lunar Housewife, throughout the book, and you've interspersed those chapters. So structurally, that's not particularly easy to do. What made you decide to do it that way? Write her novel within a novel?
So I like a novel within a novel. Her novel is sci-fi romance that takes place on the moon with a
Yes, I
Russian.
loved it.
I wanted it to be, I thought she should be a writer. She needed to have skin in the game for this whole censorship propaganda machine. But I thought she should be writing something that the CIA really wouldn't have liked. And I also thought that the chapters should be interspersed with the main text of the story so that you could see how, with everything she learns, how her story changes throughout. So I
Yes.
was even considering at one point, should I just write the whole excerpt of the Lunar Housewife first and then write the rest of the story to go around it? And I figured out that it worked much better that I wrote this book in a linear fashion
Oh, you
because
did.
I could decide what's happening in Louise's life and then how does that change what happens in the Lunar Housewife.
One of the things that Louise does in the novel, of course, is to interview Hemingway, which is just such a great portion of the novel. I really enjoyed that. So tell us a little bit more about how you researched Hemingway and his character, because he comes across quite odd, doesn't he?
Yeah. So the Hemingway interview with Louise is based on a real interview that he gave to a young female journalist named Lillian Ross in, it may even have been the exact same year, but it was in the early 50s. And he comes across, believe it or not, even stranger in her actual interview than I make him in the book. I think it's called The Moods of Ernest Hemingway, and it was published in the New Yorker in the early 50s. And she portrays him as just this total eccentric. He has everyone call him Papa. He's like calls Marlene Dietrich, and she comes over to his hotel and they're eating caviar. And he turns everything into a baseball or a boxing analogy. And his glasses are taped together, and his wife says he's never owned a jacket. Like it's so bizarre, but he's comes across as very endearing too at the same time. And when I read kind of the meta read of that article was when it came out, a lot of people hated it. Literary critics, New York publishing types, they really didn't like this, that she did this interview and that she portrayed him in this way, because speaking in a cultural Cold War terms, he was our greatest asset. He was our greatest living writer. He kind of embodied American bravado, his
Mm,
wartime
the
novels.
He-Man,
He
yeah.
was, yeah, he had driven an ambulance in World War One and written about it. And for her to portray him as kind of goofy, a lot of people really, really didn't like it. But he granted her another interview. He didn't mind it. He did not mind Lillian Ross portraying him that way. And he even did another interview with her 5 years later and sort of cemented her place as she had a long career with the New Yorker after that.
Yeah.
So I thought this is a different side of Hemingway. And I know it's a little unusual to portray him as a counterpoint to the sexism in this book, but I thought people are complex. In this case, he was a little bit of a fairy godmother to Lillian Ross, and he's a fairy godmother to Louise in this book too. And he was really, really fun to write. And
Oh,
of
he
course,
must
since
have been.
I was writing about Hemingway, I thought I should read what advice he actually did give to aspiring writers. So I brushed up on that. And then as I was writing the book, I followed his advice. So he would say, you set your count, you don't get behind in the count. Like that's, you hit that number of words and then you stop. And even if you're mid-sentence, or especially if you're mid-sentence or mid-scene, so that you, when you come back to it the next day, you know exactly where to start. And I did
Mm.
that, and the book just flowed. I was like, why didn't I do this years ago? Like my first novel, like he was totally onto something. So it was like his mentorship, the ghost of him was kind of hovering over the book.
Yeah, no, because I didn't get the bit about stopping in the middle of a sentence. I was enjoying the whole thing about the word count because I'm just restarted writing a novel right now. Finally, had a bit of a break. But I like that stopping mid-sentence. He always think, "Oh, you better finish up this bit," and then sometimes for me, the next day, I'm like, "Oh, I don't know what happens." And but that way,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really good advice. I think
Yeah,
I'll
he said
try
if
that.
you stop while it's still good and you'll know exactly what comes next the next day.
Yeah, yeah, because that's often the hardest thing, isn't it? When you come back to your writing the next day,
Yes.
where are you going to start or what's happening? Well, at least I find that challenging sometimes. So he's portrayed in the novel too as pretty leaning, almost a communist. Was that actually true?
So it's really hard to say. I know that people like George Plimpton did not want to let him appear to be a communist sympathizer. He lived in Cuba, and there are photos of him with Fidel Castro. And he definitely seemed chummy with them, but then people speculate that, oh, he just wanted lower property taxes, something like that. He wanted to be able to build something. So it's kind of difficult to say, but I think it's factual. It's been established that the FBI was listening to him in Florida and then listening to him in Cuba. And that was part of why he ended up moving back here. I came here so they would stop listening to me, but they've made it all the way to my new
Wow.
home in Cuba. Yeah.
This is, of course, one of the whole things with Louise's article is that they censor it, right? Because she does
Right.
talk about Castro. So, did the original article have anything about that?
That
The
one
one that you
didn't.
based it on? No. Okay.
No, but there is also, he gave an art of fiction interview in the Paris Review that George Plimpton interviewed him. And I think he presses him a little bit on Castro, and Hemingway sort of deflected. So it's hard to say.
Well, one of the many things your novel did is made me want to go read Hemingway again. I mean, like
Yeah,
many of us, I haven't read him for years. So I wonder if other people have been sort of inspired to return to Hemingway because of your novel.
I
Have
hope
you heard
so.
that?
Yeah.
Always a good thing to read Hemingway. So the other thing, well, many things I liked about the novel is Louise being working class. My own novel was just about a woman on the working class, my latest one, which is something we really need to explore more and more, isn't it? Because that's where most of us come from.
Yeah.
So she's in this world where she's working class and she's ashamed of herself. So talk us a little bit about that class tension that occurred in the 50s. Was that really legitimate?
I think it was. I think that if you just look at who were publishing most of the popular novels in the 1950s, it was a very specific demographic. You can't just say white men. It was like white men who went to Harvard and Yale and
Very
lived in New
specific.
York. And yeah, it's such a specific life experience. And I think that there's more than just gender disparities going on in this novel. Like class is a big piece of it because most of think of the women too who were in the circle around these men were also very high class, and a lot of
Yes,
this
from
action is
Vassar.
centered around, yeah, the Upper East Side and then the
Yeah.
Greenwich Village. So it felt important to me to establish that difference between Louise and Joe as well. Well, Joe actually is also working class, but he went to
He
Harvard.
is.
So he has his like foot up in it, but it felt like that gave him a motive too to like cooperate with the government because he has something to prove. He wants to be fully of this
Yeah.
set of people. And yeah, I mean, I thought that gave her as a character some aspirations and also would kind of help the reader identify with her more. Because as you point out, most of us are working class or our grandparents
Absolutely.
were. And so we're going to root for that kind of character a lot more, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I really enjoy that about her. Of course, the thing that really strikes you as you read the novel now is how relevant it is to what's happening today. So you wrote this novel a few years ago, right? So when you were writing it, did you know that this was going to be as relevant as it is with censorship and the government and
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw that coming. I think that the ubiquity of propaganda today
Mm, yes.
online with bots talking to us
Yeah.
and the foreign interference has been a huge issue. And I already, I guess the 2016 election, we had all heard about Russian interference in our election. So it was on my mind. And also I wrote it in 2020. So I think that cultural moment definitely informed this book because Louise's novel is about two people who are totally isolated in
Yeah.
this lunar colony, and they're in love and they're also really suffocated by each other. And so, in that sense, I think I literally wrote it from April to June of 2020.
Oh,
So
wow.
I
That
think
quickly.
I don't, yeah, I took Hemingway's advice. I wrote it really quickly.
That's impressive.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have never done that again. But there was something special about that time. I think we were all
Yeah.
learning how to bake. I mean, I don't mean to say that and make light of the COVID pandemic, but it was a time when people were hyper focused, I think. We were like baking sourdough and learning how to
Yep.
crochet, and I already had 60 pages of this book, and I thought I'm going to do it, just finish it. But I don't know if the if that hadn't happened, if the flavor of those chapters where two people are just alone and cannot interact with anyone else and they're eating their prepackaged food would be the same as it was if it was written in then. Yeah.
So the title is it's a great title. And it does a lot of work, doesn't it? It's the title of Louise's novel. It's also a description of kind of what the society wants her to be. It's also a bit ironic, a sort of science fiction spin. So was the title always there, or did you get it later?
I got it later, and an agent actually came up with the title. So at first, yes, at first, very long time ago, the book was called The Long Leash because that was the CIA's term for this
Yeah.
program. You know, they were
Oh,
like, we're gonna give funding and have some control over arts and letters, but it's gonna be a program with a long leash. We won't control every little decision that's made, but we're gonna have
we're there.
our hand
Yeah.
is on the end of the leash. So I thought that was kind of interesting and relates to the romantic themes in the book and who's controlling whom and that kind of thing. But it wasn't specific. You know, it wasn't. It was like a working title. And my agent, Shannon Hassan, was like, "What about the Lunar Housewife? Because I already had a line in the first section of Louise's book where Catherine says to Sergei, "What am I, your lunar housekeeper?" And so that's where it came from. And yeah, I feel like it does do a lot of work for the book because the term housewife, too, we don't really use it anymore. We would say stay-at-home mom. So it sets the book in decades past. And then the lunar part, this is going to have some sci-fi in it. And all of this is making me want to write a book like this again.
I
It
know.
was so fun. It was really, really
It
fun.
would have been a lot of fun. So, like when you were writing the book within a book, was it called The Lunar Housewife, like her part of it, that book? That was the
Yes.
title you had for the book. And then they decided to make it, or you decided to make it for the whole book.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
that's
was always the title for that part. Yeah.
yeah, the part where someone she says to Sergey, basically, I'm just a housewife, and you sort of then you click, oh, that's why it's called that. It's really, and it's like, oh my goodness, she's supposed to be an astronaut, she's supposed to be up in space, and yet she's just a housewife kind of thing. Like she still can't be fully realized, and it's kind of
Yeah, and
it's still
I
relevant.
it is still relevant, and I think that was also very much informed by the experience of millions of women during COVID. I remember thinking, I have two little kids. Well, then during COVID, they were 4 and 1,
My
and
goodness.
yeah, so they were very little, and my husband pivoted. He's an architect. He pivoted to working by Zoom. There we
Yeah,
are, online
yeah.
at home. And I would keep them quiet during Zoom calls and feed them and I did everything. And I would write at
Mhm.
night. And I remember thinking, I am an unpaid employee of this architecture firm because I'm keeping, yeah, I really felt the way Catherine did. Although Catherine, the flip of that, which was the controversial thing about Louise's book, was that the Soviets were paying Catherine an equal salary,
And equal. I know, I love that part. That was
Sergey.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
that came out of some stuff I read about the pay for domestic labor movement in the 70s and how there was this push to get women, and people still talk about it,
Oh, yeah.
a compensation for domestic labor. So I was kind of exploring that idea.
Exactly. Yes, because as you're reading the part when they're on the moon, you have to keep reminding yourself this is actually science fiction. This actually did not happen. Because it's really well done. You can kind of imagine them in this little lunar module being on the moon. So did you do some research with NASA and sort of what it would be have been like to
I
do
did
that?
more research on sci-fi of the 50s. So it was like more
Right.
important to me to portray it the way a writer in the early 50s would have. And when my publisher accepted the book, they even told me to like dial it up. The kind of, what did they call it? Gadgety language, gizmo kind of talk.
Yeah, 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 right.
Because I think it was still very much it was a fiction in the early 50s. We hadn't landed on the moon yet, but we were sort of obsessed as a culture with portraying the future and how sleek and metallic everything was going to be. And I really had fun with that, with how would they have imagined it. I looked at a lot of images of the covers of sci-fi magazines. I looked at the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone was a big inspiration for the Lunar Housewife because It was not only like contemporary, but it was subversive. I think Rod Serling was one of the first people to put a black family on TV as the lead characters in an episode. He wanted to make a program about civil rights and was rejected. So he was like, I'm going to make the Twilight Zone and hide the message in these episodes. And so I didn't know that before I started doing research for this book. But when I read that, I was like, that's brilliant. I mean, that's exactly what Louise is trying to do about gender and truth and propaganda.
I remember the Twilight Zone very well and the Outer Limits as well. And it was
Yes.
quite subversive at the time. The whole Lunar Housewife thing with women's roles in the 50s and how they had changed after the war. Because Catherine was a fighter pilot, was or she was a no, she was a crop duster, wasn't she?
Rochester, yeah.
So during the war, she, like many women, had a role, and now suddenly they don't in the 50s. So you kind of play with that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to go into how that responsibility and freedom was given to women and then kind of yanked back. And I'm sure it's portrayed now as if all of the women in the 50s were just totally docile and complacent. And I can't imagine that was really the case at all.
Oh,
So there were millions of women who had this memory of what I did during the war, and now I'm not doing it anymore. And yes, Catherine is supposed to be one of them.
yes, and those are our pioneers, those women.
That's
There are women, certainly lots of women in the 50s that did a lot of things. There were constraints, but they did
yeah.
break through because that was the beginning of them starting to break through and then getting into the 60s. So, would you like to do a reading from The Lunar Housewife?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll read the first few pages. Okay, so it opens in summer 1953. In a room packed to the gills with New York mucky mucks, Truman Capote was tucked into a corner of the couch. Arthur Miller, sans Maryland, stood smoking by the window. I had my attention fixed on a waitress. I hadn't noticed her peeping at me until Joe and I went to stand at the fireplace beside Harry and Glennis. Scanning the party guests, I landed on her and froze, the champagne glass cold in my clammy palm. Harry began delivering his toast beside me, but I didn't hear a word. Joe's hand rested, warm and firm, at the small of my back. The waitress stood apart from the crowd, tall and slim, holding her empty tray against her thighs. She wore the typical uniform, black blouse, black pencil skirt, tawny hair pulled into a chignon. Her eyes were narrowed in my direction. I knew her name, Beverly. I prayed she didn't remember mine. Harry crowed. The more anyone said, hell, you can get sports on the radio, you can get politics from the Times or the Journal, the more we'd pack it in. There was resounding laughter. How many times did I ask you, Joe? How much will it cost to add just another teensy 400-word feature? Just another column. Every damn day, Joe replied to more laughter. I tore my gaze from Beverly and smiled stiffly at our audience. Damn it to hell. This was supposed to be a hotshot moment for me. Sure, most of these people probably saw me simply as Joe Martin's girl, the arm piece of one of Downtown Magazine's founders. Little did they know I had written a feature for this issue, right after the short story from Flannery O'Connor. Anyway, thank you for believing in us, sons of bitches, Harry continued. Everyone cheered, lifting little bowls of champagne like sparkling breasts. We'd gathered to celebrate the launch of Downtown's second issue in Harriet Glennis's apartment, a sprawling Classic Six on the Upper East Side. There'd been a more formal party for the first issue, which had been a smashing success, largely thanks to Harry's popular article about the storied Harvard Yale football contest, the oldest fan at the game. I have to take a sip.
This is why we edit.
I need my tea.
Yeah.
This one should have been a more intimate bash, but the living room was crammed with people, three-quarters of them male. The attractiveness of the remaining quarter, the female guests, far outperformed the national average. Joe took a step forward. If I can add a few words, he addressed the room in a voice that wasn't quite his own. I could smell his sweat and the metallic tang of the St. Christopher medal he tucked under his collar. Harry and I, especially Harry, were confident we'd make it to a second issue, but we appreciate your faith in us. Thank you for spreading the word among writers and for bringing investors. Harry lifted his foggy champagne glass. And if Nelson Rockefeller were here, we'd say, thanks a heap for the interview, old man. To Rocky, shouted a guy on the couch, lifting up his joint. Coils of smoke ribboned around him. Everyone laughed again. Everyone but me. I think I'll stop there because my voice is cracking.
That's perfect. That really gives you a whole sense of that period and that time. I really felt that when I was actually I listened to it on the audio book, but I
Oh,
got
good.
that sort of high society 50s literati period that I don't know much about, but you kind of know in a way through movies and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
It's becoming very popular, isn't it? Have you found that with your publishers that they want
I have.
that
I think
period?
that there have been so many World War II novels
Yes. It's time
that,
to finish the war. Yeah.
yeah, right. It's like time to look at what were the consequences after that? Like what was,
Yeah.
and as I think I was touching upon earlier, there's this sort of like scrim that we've been told the 50s was conformity and domestic bliss and it's so just the tip of the iceberg for what was really going on. And a lot of the counterculture that we think about with the 60s and the feminist movement and all, the seeds were planted way before that. So yeah, it was really interesting to read about.
Yes. There's also a huge darkness in the 50s. The men had come back from war. They weren't really able to process what they had been through. That wasn't done in those days. They just had to go back and everything was back to normal.
Right.
Things weren't normal. So, yeah, the aftermath of the war, I think, is something that as writers, it's a wonderful thing to start delving into.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So you've now written Fraulein M, The Lunar Housewife, and The Mesmerist. So they're all different historical periods. So there a common thread in the women you're drawn to write about?
I think the women I'm drawn to write about tend to be like they like to break the norm.
Yeah,
They question the status quo. I mean, in The Mesmerist, one of the main characters I based on a real woman, Abby Mendenhall, who ran a home for unwed mothers in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. And she was successful and she kind of fought City Hall
yeah,
because there was this system of sort of like tacit approval of prostitution in Minneapolis. While they denied it happened at all in their city, they also levied monthly fines against the madams and the sex
mm,
workers, and they would just come in on a monthly basis, pay their fines, and leave. So it was definitely almost like a skim operation happening that the government was perpetrating. So these society, they were rich women, society women in Minnesota or in Minneapolis lobbied, they made their case publicly. They would go talk to the newspapers and they made their case to the city council that you are making money off of this thing that you say is against the law. And we are having to court donations to care for these people when the inevitable happens and they have babies.
yes,
So they hated by the city council, but they successfully got the city council to give them two-thirds of the fines. So the money went to this Bethany home, which was fascinating to me because it was operational starting in the 1870s, and they allowed the women, if they wanted to keep their children, even if they were unmarried, and they would give them job training and send them on their way. And sometimes they would help them find husbands too, because it was the late 1800s. But I thought that was really interesting. So I like to look for like women who are, we would say like ahead of their time, but no one is ahead of their time. They're of
no,
their time. And I do like, I'm interested in stories about government.
yes,
And
yeah, sounds like it. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, the way that government interferes in people's lives, affects people's lives, and the way that people advocate for themselves. And I think that it's always relevant, but all
well,
politics is
also,
local, all politics is
oh,
personal. Yeah.
very much so, and also like pushing against the status quo.
Yes.
That there's always lots of richness in that concept, isn't there? One of my goals for the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other writers. So, what's one thing you learned from writing The Lunar Housewife that you didn't know before?
I learned from writing. Well, I think something that I touched upon earlier was it really is good to write every single day. I think oddly, when I was writing Fräulein M, I didn't have as many responsibilities. I did have a full-time job then, but I certainly could have been writing every day, and I didn't. I'd be like, Saturday is going to be a big writing day, and I would try to write 3,000 words on a Saturday. And then it goes cold over the week, and I end up deleting a lot of those words.
Yeah.
I did find that having that momentum really helped. And it's funny because writing teachers had been telling me forever to write every single day, and I ignored it. And then I've never written a book as quickly as I wrote The Lunar Housewife. Also, I would say write what really truly write what interests you and what you
Yes.
think is fun. Because the one way that I think I did get through The Lunar Housewife and why I wrote it every day during spring of 2020 was that I was entertaining myself. It was fun.
Yeah.
I knew from a tiny bit of early pitching that my agent did with that like first 60-page sample that not every editor was going to like that novel within a novel. And not every reader likes it. I know they don't. Some people think it's confusing or they just
Yeah, I thought it worked
it
beautifully.
stretches credibility or something like that. But to me, it's fun. I like books with a book within a book. I
Mhm.
can think of several that I've loved over the years. And so I did it. And I'm glad that I did. And if you enjoy it enough, it will be better. And then hopefully you find someone else who likes the same thing. It doesn't have to appeal to everyone. But
No, I
I
think that's really
definitely
important. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely wrote what was fun for me and had a lot of fun. Probably the most, I won't like give spoilers, but the last section of The Lunar Housewife was like so much fun.
It would have been very much fun. Yeah, I know.
I
I
love
love the ending. It's like a
yeah.
thriller towards the end, isn't it? There is
Yeah.
lots of elements of that. Actually, did you outline that whole thing, or did you kind of like every day go, oh, what's going to happen next?
I usually work with the sort of a rough outline. Yeah, I'm like 70-ish% sure of what's going to happen by the end, but then things surprise me as I go along. And yeah, I do roughly outline.
It's a fine line, isn't it, of outlining too
Yes.
much and not enough. I made the mistake a few novels back of doing a really deep, in-depth outline, and then I got bored and I didn't write that novel. It's like, I won't do
Yeah.
that again.
Yes, I do
So,
think you have to allow the element of surprise for yourself.
yeah, at least from scene to scene, like outlining individual scenes doesn't work for me. Some people have incredible long outlines, don't they? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I can't do that. That's no fun anymore.
No.
Yeah, like I'll know the sort of general arc.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and I think that's a really good advice. Yeah, you have to have fun. It has to be fun. If it's fun for you, then the reader's going to be engaged. Because
Yes.
I felt that as I was listening to it, that you were enjoying yourself when you were writing this.
That's
Yeah.
good. I was. Yes, I really was. And I think that book is close to my heart for that reason. And
I
I
almost
need to
wanted,
remember to do that.
yeah, I almost wanted more. I did want more of Sergey and Katya.
Yes.
Such a great thing. The Lunar Housewife section. Yeah.
There is a scene, it's kind of metafictional, but there's a scene in the book where an editor tells Louise, like, you need more, like, spice it up. It was freeing to write something that is the implied author is not me, it's
Yeah.
her, it's Louise, and it's written in the 50s, so I could make it
Yeah.
like a melodramatic romance with
Oh,
unbelievable sci-fi elements. And I was like, this is just great.
yeah, so you could have a lot of fun doing that, and it's not like
Yeah,
the whole book. So,
right,
because the other
right.
book is more serious in a way, but yeah, I could say writing a sort of a romance type novel, but within a more serious novel, that would be really fun. Like you kind of get to indulge that, right?
Sure. Oh, yes. It was a blast.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn, for chatting with me today.
Thank you, Carol. I had a lot of fun. I really appreciate you inviting me.